Hey guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June reading wrap up. I don't know why my voice just did that. So I have 8 books to talk about today, and there are a couple of them that I have a lot to say about. So I have timestamps down below in the description for each of the books. I always do that, but for this video in particular, I would really recommend taking advantage of that because I have a feeling I'm going to be talking about a couple of these like a ton and it won't hurt my feelings. If you want to jump around and skip it, it's totally fine. So yeah, looking back on my June TBR, I'm actually so happy with my progress this month. I had 6 books on my TBR. I finished 8 and I finished 5 of the 6 that were on my TBR. And I started the last one on the TBR. I just ended up kind of straying from my TBR a bit, as you do. And I have quite the mixed bag. I had books in here that I hated. I had books in here that I loved. If you missed it, I recently put up like a wrap up of the first half of the year. So I have a favorite books of the year so far and a least favorite books of the year so far. Some of these are in those videos and I talked about them a ton in there. So I'm gonna try not be super repetitive with those books in here. I'll have those videos linked down below if you want to see them. But I think that's all I have to say for this intro. So let's just get straight into the books that I read this month. The first one that I have to talk about was Tiny Pretty Things by Sonia Sharapitwara. I totally butchered that name. This is the first book in a young adult series. I was trying to think of a good genre for this. I guess it's contemporary. It's about a bunch of competitive ballet dancers. And so we're following the point of views of several of these ballerinas. They're at this like elite dance academy in New York. And we're following them as they're like auditioning for this upcoming dance. Is it called a recital? Is it just called a show? I'm not really sure. And it's very cutthroat. There's a lot of sabotaging the other girls, a lot of girl on girl hate, a lot of eating disorders, and just like so much drama in this dance world. And I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. I'm not going to be continuing on with the series. This first book wasn't terrible. It just was not my cup of tea. Like I said, there was so much girl on girl hate and petty drama, and I just had no patience for it. By the like halfway through the book, I was just so over it. The only main character that I liked was Gigi. She's the only black ballerina there, and she also has this heart defect, and so I feel like her storyline was the most interesting, and she was also the only character who was like nice. She was the only character who was even remotely considerate for the people around her. So it was really difficult to read this book because I didn't like any of the characters. Like I could understand where they were coming from and they all had reasons for the way that they were, but I still just couldn't get over how terrible they were to their supposed friends, and I just couldn't get over it. This book is also really long for a contemporary book because we're following these girls as they are auditioning for this first show, and then they're rehearsing and getting ready for the show, and then we see the show. And then it happens again. We're watching them as they're preparing for the next show. And so there's like 2 shows in this book. So it felt like repetitive. Like I felt like I was watching the same thing happen twice. And I feel like the book would have been stronger if it had narrowed down to just one of those processes and we just like stretched that out a little bit more, if that makes sense. So yeah, overall, I don't have a ton of thoughts on this book. It was just kind of for me, pretty forgettable. But if you're super into dance or you're really curious about that kind of world, or if this sounds like your kind of thing. It really reminded me of like the Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars, trashy kind of thing, but with a lot more sabotage and girl hate and stuff. And so it just really wasn't for me. The second book that I finished this month was An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. This was our June book club pick over on my Patreon page, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. This one made it onto my favorites of the year so far list. I really enjoyed this book. If you don't know what it's about, it's a young adult fantasy. It's the first book in a series, and we follow 2 different point of view characters. One of them is a slave and one of them is a soldier, and we watch as their 2 paths kind of collide. And I wasn't sold on this book for the first half. Like I was entertained, the writing was good, the story was interesting, but I wasn't like sucked into it, you know that feeling? But something happened at like the midpoint. A switch flipped for me and I was all in, and I couldn't put it down for the second half of the book. So if you start this one and you're not super into it right off the bat, I would give it a chance and ride it out because I think it gets a lot better from there. I haven't picked up the rest of the series so far. I have heard mixed reviews, so we shall see. I'm gonna give the second book at least a try. Yeah, this one was a big pleasant surprise for me because it was so hyped, and whenever I go into a book that's been hyped up for years, I'm always wary. This exceeded my expectations. The next book I have to talk about, I listened to an audiobook, and this was in my least favorites of the year so far video. Everything is Fucked, a book about hope by Mark Manson. I kind of ranted about this book in that video, so I'll keep this one brief. This book, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not a self-help book or a self-improvement book or like an inspirational thing, as you kind of might think from the title. Maybe that was just me. That's what I thought this book was gonna be, or at least in that kind of vein. And it's not. It's just this author citing all of this research that has nothing to do with anything the entire book. He talks about different religions, different historical significant moments, some like psychology things, a bunch of different research studies. He brings in like all of this research, which was interesting at first, but honestly, this book did not have a point. The author never made a point. He just talked in circles for a really long time, trying to sound smart. I got such a bad vibe from this book. It came across as so arrogant and someone just trying to sound smart when really they're not saying anything at all. I really disliked this book. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and honestly I think I'm gonna drop that down to a 1 out of 5 stars because the more I think about it, the more annoyed I get. We're gonna move on. The next book I finished this month was in my favorite books of the year video, so we had like every other book I liked or disliked, which was kind of funny this month, and that was I Miss You When I Blink by Mary Laura Philippou. This is probably actually my like top favorite book that I've read so far this year. I really loved this one. It's a collection of essays, and I would highly recommend the audiobook. I kind of switched off between reading it physically and listening to the audiobook, and I highly enjoyed it both ways. I love the way that she writes. I was such a fan of this writing style. There's like highlights all over my book just because I thought the sentences were put together so well. It's basically just a collection of essays about her life. The title I Miss You When I Blink came from her son when he was like 6 or something, and he was making these weird rhymes. He was like, I miss you when I blink, I miss you in a sink, and like things like that. And she wrote down I miss you when I blink and then came back to it several years later and obviously like centered her book around it, and she sort of turned it into this mantra that she repeated to herself to kind of cope with these struggles that she was going through, because she kind of thought of it as she missed these different versions of herself. She missed these younger versions of herself that she no longer was, and the potential versions of herself that she could have been if she'd gone, you know, through a different life path, if she'd made different decisions. And she struggles with mental illness in here, so basically it's like her like identity crisis and her trying to make sense of the world, and I just found it so authentic and honest and real, and I just loved her voice and her writing style. I have like no similarities with this woman. Our lives are completely different, but I still really enjoyed reading her experience, and I related to things that you wouldn't think I would be able to relate to. So overall, I just was very pleasantly surprised by this book. I was intrigued by the title, picked it up, was hooked from the first page. So yeah, this was a huge surprise for me. It's one of my absolute favorites of the year. I would highly recommend this one. The next book that I have to talk about is Finale by Stephanie Garber. This is the last book in the Caraval series. I feel so repetitive filming this video because I have talked about every single one of these books on this list in one video or another. This one I talked about in a vlog. But yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm surprised by that actually. It was okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It's the last book in the series, and I'm satisfied with the conclusion of this series. I've really enjoyed this series. If you don't know what Caraval is about, it's about these 2 sisters who go to Caraval, which is kind of like this like traveling carnival, but it's like magical and it's a game. I can't even describe this book to you. If you like the Night Circus, like a dark, weird, magical read, that's kind of the way that I think of it. It's really right up my alley because it has like fates and fortunes and like this deck of destiny, and it's very whimsical, and the writing style really matches that. If this writing style was in any other book, I would hate it, but it makes complete sense for the story. Like, it's very like flowery and flowy, and it's just, I don't know. But this series is like a guilty pleasure for me. I really like the characters and their relationships, and more than anything, I was more invested in the characters and the drama and their relationships, and were they gonna end up together, because this love was like forbidden. And I was just really into the drama of it more so than the plot. But my only issue with this is the last book in the series, and the plot just felt so different than the first 2 books, which isn't a bad thing on its own. I just feel like it wasn't exactly built up to in the first book. Like, this isn't the direction that the story felt like it was building to, which just makes me think that like she wrote the first book and then got a book deal for like a whole series, and she hadn't planned out the rest of the series, so now she was like trying to figure out where to go with it. That's kind of how it read. So it's not terrible. Like I said, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. If you liked the first 2 books in the series, I think you'll really enjoy this just for entertainment purposes. But as far as like this is a masterful series and everything was so well thought out. Like, it wasn't, but it was still enjoyable. The next book was also the last book in a series. I was just trying to finish my series this month, apparently. That was The Towering Sky by Katherine McGee. I also talked about this in my least favorite books of the year video, so I'll keep this brief. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Hold on, my hair is driving me nuts. We just putting it up right now. Okay, this book honestly just doesn't need to exist, and that's my main problem with it. It's 450 pages. Nothing happens in those 450 pages, and it really does nothing to help this series, to further the plot or anything. I really think that the first book, The Thousandth Floor, could have just been a standalone. I really enjoyed the first book in the series. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a fun, just like trashy book. Again, kind of like Gossip Girl, but it's futuristic. I think she just got a book deal for a series, for a book that didn't need to be a series, and there's no conflict in this book. There's like 20 pages worth of conflict in 450, so it moves very slowly, and I was just over it by the end of this book. I just kind of wished I hadn't picked it up. So if you've read this series and you really enjoyed it, maybe continue on to the third book. Honestly, I would recommend just looking up spoilers. I felt like it was a really big waste of my time. The next book I have a lot to say about because I filmed a review for this book in the reading vlog I was doing at the time, and the footage got deleted. So this is the one book on this pile that I haven't really talked about in a video yet. So we'll go in depth on this one. And that was 100 Days of Sunlight by Abby Emmons. This was an ARC copy. I believe this comes out next month, so we're almost there. And if you don't know Abby Emmons, she is an author tuber here on YouTube, and so I wanted to support her channel and her work, obviously, as another booktuber who is self-published. I always want to be as supportive as I can be. And so with that said, I didn't think this was going to be a problem because I didn't watch her channel before I found her book. I wasn't like a fan of hers. I don't know her. We're not friends or anything like that. So I didn't think it would be a problem giving like an unbiased review for this. But then as I was sitting there like thinking through my head what I was going to say about this book, I realized I was censoring myself, which I never do with other books. And so when I caught myself doing that, I realized like, oh, I would feel really bad if I said something bad about this book. Even though I don't know her, I still don't want to do that. So take my review with a grain of salt because I am acknowledging that apparently I am biased in this and I didn't realize I was going to be. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And if I'm being honest, if it was written by someone that I felt no like desire to support, I probably would have given it a lower rating. I don't know why. I don't know why I feel this way, okay? And I had really mixed feelings on this book. There were some things about it that I really, really liked, and then there were some things about it that were glaringly obvious flaws that prevented me from liking it as much as I wanted to. So this book is about a teenage girl who gets in a car accident with her grandmother and temporarily loses her sight. There's like swelling in her brain or something, and the doctors think her sight will be back in about 100 days. And so her grandparents, in an attempt to cheer her up, hire this typist to come over and type her poetry for her because she's a blogger. And so they hire this person to come over to help her keep up her blog while she's still recovering. And the person who comes to write her poetry is a teenage boy who is her age, and he actually lost both of his legs in an accident, and since she can't see him, he doesn't want anyone to tell her about his disability because he wants to be treated normally, and he likes that she treats him like everyone else. And so the story is about their budding relationship and him attempting to help her get through this because she's totally off her feet. She's just like laying in bed, oh woe is me, I don't want to go on with life. So that's what the book is about. Hold on, let me get my iPad because I made a lot of notes in the book while I was reading it. The first thing I can say that was a problem for me was I could tell the book was self-published, and I tried not to let that overwhelm my opinion about this book because I was watching one of her videos and I know that she did hire an editor and everything, but I can't help but feel if this had been traditionally published and it had gone through more hands, the quality would have been better. Quite frankly, as someone who studied writing and has gone into like editorial stuff and wants to be an editor, I couldn't help but read this kind of from an editor's perspective, and I just kept seeing things that I would change, things that felt repetitive, things that I would take out, things that could be done better. And that's 100% a me thing. If you don't read like a writer, you just read like a reader, if that makes sense. It might not bother you as much, but there were so many things that were so easily fixable that every time I came across something, I just got really disappointed. Okay, I'm debating here with myself whether it is worth going through every single note that I have on here because I feel like that's just gonna be picking apart the book unnecessarily. Like, There were a lot of things that I found issues with, but I don't really see a point in trashing this book or like picking it all apart, you know? Of course, if you're looking for it, you're gonna find problems with every book, and this book, for whatever reason, I just was like honed in on every single problem. So, problem number one, it kind of came across as a message book, and I think I just wasn't quite the target audience for this book. I did not realize that it was going to be so heavily influenced by religion, and our main character is very naive and innocent, and I feel like this book's target audience is like young Christian girls, and that's just not my jam. Like, there was even this one line where she was like talking on the phone with the guy, and she was like, I imagine him next to me for a second, but not in an inappropriate way. Like, it literally clarifies that in the book, and I just had to laugh out loud at that. So the book is very innocent, very wholesome, I suppose, and it talks about religion a lot, so that was just kind of a turnoff for me personally. That's not a flaw with the book, that's just a personal preference kind of thing. Also, I didn't really like either of the main characters for a good chunk of this book. Our main character, I sympathize with her to an extent, but she's also really, really annoying, and she keeps screaming things at other people like, you don't understand, are you blind? No, then you don't understand. Like, I understand that you're frustrated, but also you have to have some common sense to realize that other people are struggling with things. Like, your problem is not the only type of problem that exists. And you keep talking about how like smart you are and stuff. Like, you would surely have to realize that yelling at every single person who tries to help you that they don't understand or that they have it so easy, you have to realize that other people have problems. So her attitude was very standoffish to me, and my sympathy for her could only go so far, especially knowing that her issue was temporary. It's not like she was permanently blind. I don't know. I just had a hard time feeling bad for this main character with the way that she behaved. And then also, our main love interest comes in, and for one thing, he's just like really stalkery at the beginning. I'm gonna ruin the plot in the first chapter, but she tries to pull the ad from the newspaper because her grandparents did it behind her back, and when she finds out, she doesn't want them to do that. And so this kid knows that she tried to pull the ad and doesn't want someone to come over. But he tracks down her address and just shows up at her house and then refuses to leave and keeps coming back even though she tells him she doesn't want him there, which was just very like, And then he keeps saying things like he's like God or something. Like, he knows everything. He's like, I know her better than she knows herself. I know what she really needs. And I'm just like, do you? Do you really? So that, again, was very standoffish. I hate that the book started with a dream. I hate when books start with dreams. And the whole first chapter was just backstory of her recalling what happened, which that's just something that like every creative writing class I have ever had has hammered into my head not to do. So I just don't understand why she didn't just start with the accident instead of her having a dream and then reflecting on the accident. That's just like, why did you choose to write it that way? I really didn't like that this guy thinks that he knew everything and he knew what was best and he would not respect that no means no. I just really didn't like that. I was reading through these notes. This is the first time I'm looking at them again, and I said he has no personality so far besides his disability and no other motivation or development for doing this. Again, like, he'd never met her before. He didn't know her, and all of a sudden it's his life goal to help this girl. It was just kind of weird. He also says things like, I can tell they like me, or oh, I know she likes me, or everyone likes me, and this kid really thinks that everyone likes him or is secretly in love with him. Also, her descriptions of him were so inconsistent, it really bothered me. Like, one second she'd be like, Weston was just as stubborn and rude and thoughtless as always, and then the very next page she'd be like, he may be patient and kind. I was like, just a second ago you were saying he's like the rudest person you've ever met. It was so inconsistent. And then the very next page, after saying he may be patient and kind, she says Weston is not kind. It was just and overall, the further we got into the book, the cheesier it was. There were just so many things that I just cringed because it came across as so cheesy to me, and I just couldn't take it. Overall, what it came down to was I liked the idea of it, but the execution was kind of iffy for me, and I was thinking about it. I was trying to figure out why this was, and I think it was because a lot of the writing was summary compared to being scenes. So it's the whole like show versus tell don't thing. You're telling me what's happening, you're summarizing what happened instead of showing it to me in the moment, in a scene. And every story needs a balance of both, but I felt like this was so imbalanced in favor of summary, and I feel like if you only summarize things, of course there's going to be this emotional distance between the reader and your character because you're never in the moment with them. And so the overuse of summary was a really big problem for me. Also, the love interest just did like really stupid things for no reason. It was like he would acknowledge that it was really stupid and he would still do it, which I get, like some people are actually like that, but it was to the extent where it was like unbelievable. Like she wanted that to be a part of his personality, so she kept making him do these things and I just didn't buy it. I was just like, the last time you tried to do something stupid, you lost both of your legs, and now you're gonna do it again? Like, you didn't learn your lesson the first time? I can't help stupidity. I honestly, there's like this one section in the book where I just really felt like the book was like preaching at me and trying to shove this message down my throat. And it's not like it was a bad message or something. It was just the execution of it. I don't like feeling like it's getting pushed at me. I want to read between the lines and figure it out myself. Like, you don't need to spell it out, you know? Yeah, I highlighted the one. I can almost imagine he is lying beside me, not in an inappropriate way, but in an innocent way. That quote just kills me. I'm sorry. Okay, I feel like I'm being mean and I'm like picking this book apart, and that was not my goal here. My point is, I had a lot of issues with the writing. It wasn't bad, but I felt like it could have been better. I had issues with the book's message, lecturing, and how cheesy it was. But overall, I still thought it was really cute. Like, I laughed out loud at some points. I was smiling really hard. Like, it was a really cute idea, and there were good moments in here. The bad outweighed the good, is what I'm saying, basically. I tried to look past it. I tried really hard to, but it kept distracting me from the story. So, those are my thoughts on it. Yeah, if you're not bothered by, like, writing issues, and if you like the super innocent religious kind of stories, maybe this will be your cup of tea. Personally, I just went in probably expecting something different. It was my own expectations that got in the way of my enjoyment. But yeah, I was really frustrated with this book because I really wanted it to be great. But if I'm being honest, it's probably like 2 stars quality, and I gave it a 3 stars because I felt bad giving it a 2 stars. So that's my review on that. I talked about that book for like 15 minutes. Okay, so then the last book that I finished, I actually finished this in like the first couple of days of July, but I read the majority of it in June, so we're just gonna include it in here, was Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Godleb. This is another one that I listened to on audiobook, and this is a nonfiction sort of memoir about this therapist who goes through a really traumatic breakup, and so she starts seeing a therapist, and the book jumps back and forth between her struggling with her own personal problems and her experiencing this therapist, and then also her recalling these different clients that she's had and how all of them kind of came together. And at first, I didn't know how it was all going to come together, but it actually worked out really well, and I found it very intriguing. I think I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I think it has a slow start. Like, I wasn't super into it at the beginning, so if you're going to give this one a chance, you really have to give it a chance and wait for the first couple of chapters. It ended up being super intriguing because we have this therapist who's talking to her therapist, and so like in her head while she's talking to her therapist, she's thinking like, oh, I know why he's asking me this. I know how he's gonna analyze what I say. I know what he's looking for in this. So like in her head she was analyzing how he was analyzing her as a therapist. It was just an interesting insight into therapy and what they do when they're going through training and what they're looking for, or like what certain things mean. I don't know. It was just very fascinating, and I grew very attached to her clients. I thought their stories were very entertaining and very interesting because they were all very different. We have this one really obnoxious narcissist guy, and then we have this young newlywed who's dying of cancer, and then we have this old woman who was terrible to her children when she was in her 20s, and now she's in her 70s and she's found kind of like a new family with her neighbors, and she's trying to redeem herself. And it was just, I don't know, I'm fascinated by people and people's stories, so there was just so much humanity in this book, and I just really found it interesting. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, I really enjoyed this. I would recommend the audiobook. But yeah, this was a pleasant surprise for me. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. And then the only other book that was on my TBR for this month was Crashing the A-List by Summer Heacock. I had every intention of getting to this month. I did start it, but I didn't finish it. So this I am hoping to finish this coming month, especially because this is an arc and I think it comes out July 9th. So I really do want to read this. I'm really excited about this. It just didn't happen this month. So yeah, this video is probably going to be my longest wrap up in a really long time. Thank you if you are still here. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe found a book that sounds interesting to you. I'll have them all linked down below in the description if if you want to learn any more about them. And as always, I would love it if you guys would leave a comment down below with what your favorites or least favorite reads that you read in the month of June were. I would just be interested to know what you guys have been reading, and let me know if you have any recommendations for what I should put on my TBR for July, because it's already July 6th. And I haven't read anything and I don't have any plans. I have no TBR set up. I don't know what I want to read, so recommend me something, please. I'm struggling. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm actually like physically tired of talking now. So if you like this video, I would appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and you want to subscribe, I would love to have you. I put up at least 2 new videos every single week and they are usually not this lengthy. And other than that, my social media and links to my book and everything are down below in the description if you want to check those out. And I'll just see you guys in my next video very, very soon. Bye.
So hit me. So hit me. So hit me. First a confession. With you, I feel a connection. With